Hi everybody, welcome back to the devlog. I've been off of making them for 3 weeks just because the end of summer was busy, and I knew that coming back, this is what I've been working on, and I'm going to warn everybody up front, this video is going to be almost entirely just a spreadsheet, so if that doesn't interest you, then you might have to wait a little longer for something more interesting. It's just my ideas that I've laid out for all of the classes, not all, a very strong core of classes, like a large number that I feel confident building out from. And I'd like to go over them all in detail as far as giving an idea of where my headspace is at for what ideas I've got so far. But yeah, this video is going to be a spreadsheet. Sorry it couldn't be more visual, but if anybody's interested in where my headspace is at, I'm going to go in a lot of detail. I'm going to go from probably least detail to most detail. So I've got a general idea of the class role here, what I think that the class should do. Then I've got like a fusion table and some ideas for skills that I'll go more into detail on. So first I'll just go down the list of names for anybody who just wants a teaser of what classes might be in the game. We've got an alchemist, an archer, an assassin, barbarian, bard, battle mage, cavalier, charlatan, chronomancer, cleric, cultist, dark knight, druid, enchanter, like a general or guard captain. I'm thinking like a larger knight. All these names are tentative. Like I put down chronomancer, I'm just thinking of some type of a time mage. This is my placeholder name for like a larger knight that's more of like a leader type. A herbalist, a hunter, an illusionist, a knight or a soldier, a lumberjack, magic knight, martial artist, medic, medium, a psychic, a monk, a necromancer, a ninja, a paladin, pirate, pyromancer or some type of fire mage, a rancher, a raider, a rogue, a sailor, a samurai, scholar, shepherd, sorcerer, thief, valkyrie, vampire, viking, warrior, and witch. So to describe my general approach, there are some classes that conceptually are more like jobs or occupations that you would see the inhabitants of this world have. So like the rancher class only exists to be an introduction to the horse summon, which I want to add to the game, and combining into more horse themed, like a cavalier. If I fuse a rancher with a knight, then you get a cavalier. If you fuse a rancher with, I don't know, I'm actually thinking of adding like a cowboy class, having a few like pirate and vampire that are a little more, silly and thematic. For example, the lumberjack here, I added just to introduce basic axe-based abilities that could get fused up to higher level classes. The shepherd, which is already in the game, comes from the sheep summon that I came up with to induce sleep, and just a low-level way of introducing that mechanic and that ability that can maybe get fused up through higher tiers. The scholar is another one that I'm thinking of as a proto-mage, so it might get fused into multiple different types of mages depending on who it fuses with. So there are these low-tier classes that aren't meant to be very strong. Then you have your traditional D&D classes, so like rogue, like a cleric, druid. A lot of these I'm thinking of as conceptually in a second tier. So then you get things that are more conceptually a fusion between multiple things. So yes, monk is a traditional D&D class, but I'm thinking, well, a monk has healing abilities and it has like religious connotations, but a D&D monk is a martial artist, so I introduced a lower tier martial artist, and then a monk would be a fusion between a cleric and a martial artist, and there are other fusions that would make it too, but that's the idea. And then a dark knight, you wouldn't just start right in a dark knight, but it might be something that you have other types of knights or armored lower tier classes, fuse it with a darker kind of class, like maybe a necromancer or a witch, and then you get the Dark Knight. So at least 3 conceptual tiers, although the borders will be blended between them. There will be some offbeat fusions that do some unexpected things because you have to fill this entire table, but at least conceptually 3 tiers. So then we have the table down here, and down the side I have all the same classes, and plugged in a few that make sense just immediately. But there's a big table that I need to fill, and I'm keeping track of how many times each of these classes is the result of a fusion. So right now you can see there's no way to make a herbalist. I just added that last minute. No way to make a hunter. There's 1 way to make an illusionist. 3 ways to make a dark knight. And I want to keep that balance. So once I fill this out more, there will be some minimum number of fusions that makes each of the classes. Some will be easier to achieve, more common. Some will be rarer. Some might have very limited number of fusions that you can use to make them. So there should be peaks and valleys in this number line, but generally there should be ways of charting all the way across all of the classes. So I've plugged in a few that seem kind of natural. So a martial artist and an assassin, that's a ninja. A necromancer and a magic knight can make a dark knight. Now, these are subject to change, even that's not very filled out. Let's say I filled out all this table, but then I add another class. Well, then I need to add that class as fusions and sort of back propagate it through here in places that it would be natural and balance out what I've already got more. So the reason this table isn't super important to fill out right now is because of that, and also because if I go down this line and say hunter, charlatan, what is a hunter and a charlatan make anyway? And if I come up with an idea, then that would add to where I build out that conceptual third tier, because if I don't have a good idea, then I can make it. Or not if I don't have a good idea, but if I don't have something in the game that's a good fit. But that's my approach, is filling it out and then tallying up how many pathways to that class you have, using these cells as a guide to see what's missing, especially in that conceptual third tier. If I don't have enough ways of making something that may seem like it's in the second tier, then maybe I add something that's for the first tier. Maybe I don't have enough occupation themed first tier jobs to fill that out. But then besides that, while it might be easy to go back to an early part of the game and recruit an early first tier job like the shepherd, there should also be ways of making the shepherd in fusion. Like there will be some fusions where I might be able to, by some logic, even though it might have less powers than a higher tier class, some fusion might be a surprise, and you fuse these two strong things, well, you go back to a lower tier, but you're bringing back these high level abilities, and then you can start like cycling through these fusions again. So the challenge with this, with such a large table, is to fill out enough of these cells where when the player fuses them, it makes sense. And they're like, yeah, I can see that fusion making this class. Like at least more than half of them. Some of them will just have to be like functional, like, oh, I don't have enough ways of making a rogue. I need to add rogue as like a surprise fusion in all these different cells that don't have anything better that fits. But ideally, at least more than half would make a lot of sense, and then some can be a total wild card. Yeah, and then you're bringing back the high level abilities. So the other thing I've got is stats for each of them, and I just do low, medium, or high, like what I think ballpark where I'm feeling would make sense for these classes, and then I'm scoring it based on like low is just 0 points. If they have medium, I'll say there's a point, and then high is 2 points. So I scored them all. And then you have, at minimum, there are some classes in here that have a score of 4 so far, which is very low. So a rancher, I said, any sort of class that's more of natural, or I don't know, you can see them working outdoors. I thought, their HP should be not low. Maybe they're not a tank, but yeah, a rancher's probably pretty strong. They're smart, or at least resistant to, conditions, which is what mine actually does. They should be medium agile, not the fastest, but I didn't think of them as wearing a lot of armor or using magic. And so yeah, they're just it's just a job. It's a low tier class. Then you go to something that's a 7. So a monk has all these abilities between getting from martial artist and a cleric. So it's, when I think of a monk, I'm like, yeah, they're healthy, like a martial artist style fantasy monk. Not a tank, but their HP should be fine. Some ability to use magic. Pretty strong. Doesn't wear any armor. The high mind stat represents like a monk's inner calm. They should be somewhat resistant to mental status effects like what I've got: berserk, fear, charm, and sleep, and they should be quite agile. Although I put medium, I know monks are usually very fast. I kept the martial artist. That's the advantage they have over them. But anyway, these are just ballpark, like what I'm thinking. It gives me an idea of whether I'm short selling any of the classes, or whether I have some of them being thought of as too strong. So like battle mage is another one that is like, okay, they're a mage, but they battle. So they have a bit of everything, and you get them from fusing sorcerers and knights, and they have access to a lot of things. But maybe if I see a high score, I can debuff that class another way with some sort of passive ability. If a class is too low, then maybe I buff them with a passive ability. So now I'd like to go over that. That's my approach. I think that's a good explanation of my approach in a relatively short amount of time. The rest of the video, I'm going to go into a lot of detail. This is for people who really, really want to know what each of these classes do in specific. But medium level of detail is I will give this row and explain my general idea for each class, and then I'll go into the specific ability ideas that I have. So if we go alchemist, I'm thinking that an alchemist is one that uses a lot of potions, maybe makes potions, but they should manipulate items in some way. I don't really imagine any sort of crafting mechanic exactly, but maybe there'll be some items that can be combined with a potion in combat, or maybe you only have access to, maybe you have a diverse access to abilities, but only based on the items that you have. Then we have an archer. This is the class that specifically is good at using a bow. They're not a ranger, they're not anything more specific than that. They're just really good at using a bow, so I'm thinking you get your crit abilities, you get high accuracy abilities. An assassin should have access to some of those instant kill attempt abilities, like in Shin Megami Tensei, you have like the dark and light spells. If you want to think of like Pokemon, like guillotine or fissure, and poison makes sense for an assassin. Barbarians should exploit the berserk status for their own benefit. Bards generally buff their party, so I'm thinking their abilities will be songs that buff the party. Bards do a lot of things in a lot of games, so I could come up with something more creative to go with it. A battle mage, a physical class that counters mages and has fight spells. So I'm thinking if you're going to have a battle mage and you separate it from a magic knight or a spell sword, when I hear the word battle mage, I think, well, they're a mage that battles, but they should battle mages. So I'm thinking they use the silence status effect. They maybe drain magic power. They maybe punish mages. So it's an anti-mage, but also with high armor, I'm thinking. Cavalier, that would again arise from maybe like a fusion with a rancher who summons a horse, and then you add them to a knight and you get a cavalier who's good at using horses. So abilities that you benefit from having a horse summon. A charlatan was one of the early fusions I had when I just had some basic classes written down, and I thought, what would a cleric and a thief make? So I'm thinking there's some kind of a thief, some additional tricky abilities that the thief doesn't have, but they'd be more based on mind than agility. But that's most of the idea I have so far. Chronomancer, the battle clock is a very important mechanic in my game, so I wanted a class that is like a time mage. That makes sense, I think. Manipulating time very directly compared to others. Now, cleric, usually traditionally you're a white mage or healer in a game, right? But I'm thinking I'm going to take, when I describe what the job is and what it does, when you fuse them, what they add to the character that you're fusing is just what that noun implies, I guess. So when I say cleric, that's not the only type of healer, but, you know, they have holy abilities and whatever that are granted by their god in fantasy settings. So I'm thinking they could get some prayer abilities that maybe they're not the best direct healer. Maybe I have a one that's like a doctor or a medic or a white mage. Maybe there's some type of healing magic that isn't holy or whatever, but they have some. When I'm thinking of like a prayer ability in an RPG, I'm thinking something that's party wide, maybe like a blessing on the whole party. So maybe that's turn by turn regen, or maybe it is luck. So maybe you're less likely to miss or more likely to crit. So it would have some healing, but I'm not actually thinking of it as the best healer. I'm thinking turn undead is like a classic cleric ability, so maybe there are abilities that are really detrimental to a necromancer or something like that. And some healing, but more thematically a blessing on the whole party. A cultist would make sacrifices, so I'm thinking they sacrifice the minions that they've summoned and you get some benefit or buff out of it. A dark knight, I don't know, generally a more evil flavor of knight or paladin is all I wrote down, but what I do have some ideas here I'll go into. This isn't very specific actually of a role, but druid, they shape change, maybe summon animals. That makes sense. Enchanters should really be focused on the charm and maybe the sleep status effect. The general / guard captain, maybe they buff their fellow party members. Maybe they summon like soldier minions, so human soldiers as minions that maybe they help you block or group together and attack or something like that. Herbalist is one of these early abilities that I thought would make sense as like before the druid when you combine them with some sort of magical class, but I said gathering and botany based skills because I also want it to be a component of the alchemist, but I don't know what gathering means yet. I mean, like I need items that makes sense with, but that's a direction for it. I don't have specific ideas. You got hunter, which is like an archer, but they're less of a specialist in those bow skills I was talking about, but you have maybe an animal companion and some survival skills or an animal summon ability. They're kind of a class that's a mix of a few things. The illusionist, I'm thinking of a minion summon adding that's like an illusory double. So you summon a copy of yourself that takes hits or infuses and increases your evasion, and the illusionist should be the primary specialist of that. If I could just skip a few to the martial artist, one idea I had for them was that they'd have an after image ability where an illusory double is created by them when they're hit or missed, one of the two. But the illusionist should be able to summon like a lot of them at once. But I want more ideas for illusions. The knight and soldier, that's I've shown that the sprite I have for it. I'm thinking it's just it's a very simple physical class that more focuses on defense than attack. The lumberjack was introduced to introduce those basic axe-based attacks and passing this cleave ability that I've coded in and being like the step before a barbarian. That's kind of the purpose they serve. Magic Knight is like a knight, but more magic-based physical attacks or magic-enhanced abilities. So maybe you get some elemental stuff in there, or just using MP to make stronger attacks. Martial artists are fast physical fighters, high offense, low defense. Maybe you get a flurry of attacks with multiple smaller hits, so if things trigger off of a hit, maybe each hit is not as strong, but you get a lot of them. The medic I added as a pure healer, just to counterbalance or have a more specialized healer than the cleric. A medium talks to ghosts, and I'm thinking what that means is maybe having abilities that trigger off of knocked out teammates or just deaths occurring, whether minions or party members or enemies. You got the psychic that is all about these mental conditions. So fear, charm, sleep, berserk, maybe silence. I did have the idea, the reason it's called Mind Flavor here is I was thinking of a class that just takes over minions and brings them over to your side. So like mind control. And depending on if I generate a lot more ideas for this, I might split that into multiple psionic classes. The monk is the martial artist, but with more of like a mystical bent, and they should have more access to healing abilities. Necromancer is a minion-based class that summon skeletons. I'm thinking either like adding a zombie or a ghost, like maybe they have different modes of operation, but having like an army of undead makes a lot of sense to me. Might also be where you get the revive ability from, since they're raising people from the dead. Ninjas are good at evasion. I'm thinking they use smoke bombs. I have the assassin be a separate class, so I thought poisoning could be more in the realm of the assassin, and ninjas are more just strict, like that's where you get your evasion abilities from. Paladins, they're probably going to be a fusion of a cleric and a knight, but you get, buffs, blessings, healing as a secondary component, and punishment is as a theme, which I'll go into because I have some ideas for abilities for that. For pirates, I had an idea for an ability that I'm terming mutiny, which doesn't take over or mind control minions, but makes them attack their own summoner, and I thought that fit a pirate. Pyromancer for fire spells, really involved with the burning status effect. Ranchers just kind of exist to introduce horses as a summon, but I thought they could also have sheep. Raiders are another form of archer, but maybe like using flame arrows, burning down villages, stuff like that. Maybe they have some sort of thief themed abilities as well. So rogues as separate from, and this is something like I had to think about, I've already got ninjas, I've got assassins. Now I have rogue and I also have thief. So I really want thieves to be focused on stealing. And then rogues, I'm thinking of their fighting style in classic fantasy, like the two daggers and they're really fast. So they're really good at agility, critting, but it doesn't inherently apply thievery, and that's what a thief does. I have a sailor because I wanted the proto class to both a pirate and a Viking. So I'm thinking that's an occupational class as well. Maybe something to do with water. I don't actually know. Like, that one was a hard one to come up with ideas for. But with water, I'm like, okay, you could heal burning, maybe. But also sea shanties as maybe like a secondary, similar to a bard song ability. Or maybe they get one of them. Sailors use rope. Maybe they bind and like cause like a stun for a turn or something. But I don't know. And then samurai, I thought maybe like a combination of a ninja and a knight. I'm not entirely sure how it'll be different than a knight. I have some ideas, but I'm generally thinking of them as more of a defensive class. Scholars, I'm thinking of them as being good at learning. Like, yes, they're the pre-mage class, but maybe they have some abilities to get more EXP gain, or they might, as they level up, actually have access to spells from other classes, but maybe later, but if you level them up, their abilities that they can learn might go farther. The shepherd, I got that sheep summon. There's a class that's entirely focused on using them, and also enhancing your ability to use minions in general. general and control them. Sorcerer is what I'm calling your basic glass cannon black mage. They're a magic damage dealer, probably elemental themed. Thieves I already talked about, they steal. And Valkyrie is something I have for like a promotion class for the Viking in a lot of cases, but maybe they're like the paladin version of a Viking, so they have holy abilities as well. Because of the whole thing with like Ragnarok, I'm thinking of them also being a class that is focused on like revival, like the warriors die and then they come back for Ragnarok, some sort of themed ability like that. Vampires, I just thought if I'm gonna have ninjas and pirates, vampires a cool one. I can think of them as like, you know, a monster class, but they're humanoid and they have some interesting abilities like turning to fog, maybe turning into a bat form, draining life. Then you got Vikings, so I need to differentiate them from barbarians, warriors, raiders, but one idea I had was that they make sacrifices. Maybe that gives them some benefit. Warriors, I'm thinking of as a counterpart to a knight, where a warrior might be more offensive than defensive. I'm thinking having this ability, I've put it in the game, like a smash ability that like you hit the enemy, but you might also scatter some of their minions. So I'm thinking maybe it's a warrior with low armor that uses a big hammer or something like that, but more strict offense, and a witch. And my idea for that is maybe they have minions and they sacrifice them to make a witch's brew that has different effects depending on what goes into it. Those are my general idea. Like these are just jotted down ideas in this, and then I took these and made some ideas for skills, which I can go over. So I have these ideas for classes, and we're going from this, which is basically just a description of the class role, or when I think of this name, what is the class fantasy that implies? How do you make somebody feel like they're playing as an archer? And so to inspire the skills and what abilities they have, I go and I look at other games that have similar classes, you know, that includes JRPGs like the game I'm making, but also action RPGs is something that can have abilities that might be able to be translated into an interpretation in the game system that I have. I'll also look at like magic cards. Like I'll just do a search on the keyword assassin and see what abilities that they put on them. And some of them are like generic. Like if you play that game, it might be like, oh, other assassins get +1/+1. Well, that is a supportive ability for an assassin deck. But there might be some that are more inspired that it's like in some way has some sort of ability that in the card game will assassinate your opponent's creature. And I look at that and try to see how I can translate something like that into a JRPG. You know, if I'm not sure about a certain class, I'll go pull up other games and see what they've done. Then I fill this out with my ideas, and now I'm also making a table here where I'm going to fill out the ideas with like names. So I'll take that idea, put it in, give it a name, write down what I think it should cost in terms of time and what it should cost in terms of MP, who has it, and then more specific implementation, which will tell me, okay, this ability needs to keep track of some sort of variable, and I don't have that in my code yet, so I'm going to have to do that. Now, that table that I just showed or tabbed over to isn't complete at all. Like, I just started that one, but I've got my ideas written down. And the other idea is that when this table is filled out with specific implementation, these columns will tell me more about balance, and I can check like which parts of the game mechanics are over-interacted with, under-interacted with. Do all of the status effects and stats and systems have enough diversity of abilities that are available that act directly on them? So for Alchemist, I have an idea. You could use potion items as charges to cause either burning explosions, charming love potions, maybe silence or poison might make sense also. This one is one I got from a magic card, I think, at some point. I think I did a search on Alchemist and I found one that was using some sort of blood alchemy or whatever. So I'm like, what about if the Alchemist draws blood? Maybe their attack generates potions for you to use, or maybe you could draw it from yourself. Also, field spells. I need to have abilities that can be used outside of battle, so maybe while I don't have a full crafting system, I'm not going to be doing that. Just transmuting one item from one item to another is something that maybe an alchemist could do, especially to make potions. Then for Archer, their attacks might not be hindered by a target's minion, so they're shooting right over them and they're hitting the enemy directly. Now, that's another one where I have that idea. Now I need to implement and figure out exactly how do minions normally hinder attacks, which I want them to do, but I haven't nailed exactly down how, other than a lower hit rate, but I don't know if that's sufficient. They could have a snipe ability that has perfect aim. Maybe it takes more time. Also, poison arrows are a possibility, or like a low chance of poison. Maybe not as much as some more specialized poison classes, but poison arrows, even flaming arrows are totally in the realm of an archer. An assassin, I had this idea that they could expend speed buffs for a chance to poison their target. So let's say they have 3 stacks of speed. You use them all up. You get rid of them. You use all of the advantage you have and all this setup to prepare to assassinate a target, and then you get them. So maybe it's a very, very, very high chance of poisoning a target to the point where it would even work on a lot of bosses. Also, instant kill abilities, which are pretty typical, like a low chance of instant kill ability you would find in an RPG, but I'm still not sure of it because I almost want to design for anything you want to do to be able to use against bosses. So it's there as an idea, but I'm not certain I'm going to use that. I kind of like the idea of like set up a really high chance of poisoning them and you could use any status effect you want against the boss. Assassins are kind of like hitmen, so maybe if they eliminate an enemy personally, they might generate more gold as payment. I'm also thinking like Assassin's Creed, you blend into a crowd. Maybe if you have a lot of minions, it boosts your evasion even further than any benefit they might give you. Although if that's already what they do, then I would need to come up with another way to do it. Possibly your evasion is increased by your enemy's minions when you go into their crowd and attack them. Barbarian, they have the rage ability in like D&D, so they would inflict berserk on themselves for some buff. I'm not sure if attack or defense or what, but it's my only idea, but it's totally in the realm of a barbarian. I came up with 3 kinds of songs for a bard. A soothing song, which increases your mind, which maybe increases your resistance to being inflicted with berserk, charm, sleep, and fear. An inspiring song that increases your attack. Maybe another song that increases your agility, like a marching song or something. It's pretty typical for bards to be like a secondary healer as well, so maybe like a regenerative song that gives a little bit of health to the whole party. I do want healing abilities, if they're not for a very healing focused class, to be minor healing effects, but you know, that's something a bard often has healing magic. For a battle mage, like I said, it was one that's really focused on fighting other mages, so using physical attacks that inflict silence, so you can turn off mages, turn off their ability to cast spells. Possibly reflect style spells or magical spells that bounce back or counter spell magical abilities. Possibly a high cost anti-magic field that silences everybody, so maybe that might pair well if the rest of your party is physical anyway and you silence all of the enemies as well. As for the Cavalier having horse-based abilities, I said, which is a bit of a weird term, but I'm thinking of a horse as being a summon that you maybe only have one of, and maybe does something with your agility, but I'm thinking of it as there's a cost to retreat, like switch with another party member in your backup, but a horse might allow you to bypass that and you only need one. But a Cavalier might benefit from just having a horse by their side, so maybe you have a high chance of critting, like going at them, jousting them, getting a big hit on them. Maybe you could use your horse to block attacks and the horse dies, you fall off your horse instead. Maybe you summon another minion with a horse, you bring in a soldier and a horse that ride it. Now a charlatan, I'm thinking of like a thief ability, maybe like an alternate version of that, which is a contest from the charlatan's mind stat to the opponent because they're being fooled to giving up their abilities or gold. And snake oil, which is maybe changing their healing abilities into poison. Chronomancer, maybe it costs more time, like you got kind of lost in a time warp if you're going to attack the time wizard. Maybe you could just add to the clock directly and it costs their turn, but you just straight up add to the battle clock, which I think you can get away with without going infinite, as long as their turn is used up. I don't want there to be a cycle where you could just go infinite and have an infinite turn, but I think that would be okay. Also, if it costs MP, like there has to be some limit on it, so you can't come up with a combo that just breaks the game. Haste abilities make sense for them too, and debuffing enemy agility. Clerics, for status effects, you gotta have cure spells, and I feel like cure blindness, I mean, it's an obvious reference to Jesus or whatever, but as far as like religious themed abilities, so that they're not like the main healer, but maybe they have some status healing abilities and some mild heal, that makes sense. Also, spell that initiates party regen over time, that's, I'm thinking of like the blessing, like a party-wide blessing type of thing. Cultists, I said they sacrificed minions, so I didn't have a home for the snake summons yet, but that makes sense for them. Maybe they restore their MP, because I have a lot of other kinds of buffs elsewhere, but I thought making a sacrifice to get some magic power back makes sense, but it could be a stat buff as well. Now the Dark Knight, I was thinking, how do I make an armored fighter and make them dark? They could induce fear. They could punish fear, do more damage to feared enemies. Often you get, I think in like Final Fantasy, a Dark Knight, maybe Final Fantasy IV has an ability to sacrifice their own HP for strong attacks. So sort of like a Blood Knight ability. You could break their will debuff their target, the target's attack. Druid, I had the idea of summoning animals, but you don't necessarily know what kind. So if I have enough added, and right now I have snake and sheep, horse is an idea, but if I have enough, it could be a random selection of like 3 animals at a time. So value without consistency. Also, that's more of like a wild feeling for a druid. Maybe they don't specialize at poisoning with snakes or putting people to sleep with sheep, but you get like 3 things, so it's value. Also, different animal forms, the way I was thinking of it is instead of transforming them into an animal exactly, it's like if I do turtle form, you just automatically, instead of buffing or debuffing, like adding to the stack, you go into a specific state. So when you go into turtle form, your defense is maxed and your agility is bottomed out, no matter where you were before, something like that. I don't know if I want to make a bunch of animations for, well, you can't really see your party member for all these different animal forms. I'm thinking maybe once you use that ability, that ability is replaced while you're in that form with an ability that, like I said, a turtle attack or whatever type of ability you have for that makes sense for that animal. Then an enchanter needs to be able to charm. I think they should be able to do something to charm enemies, so maybe drain their magic. Like if they're charmed, you're like stealing their life essence or something. Maybe once you snap out of charm, I'm thinking of like a fey enchanter, something like, oh, the glamour is gone and you see something what's underneath. So I'm thinking maybe when you recover from charm, you inflict fear on them, which could be an interesting one. Or making charmed enemies sacrifice their own minions to you. So I'm thinking of the enchanter as using charm, but then demanding a lot from charmed enemies. The general and guard captain, maybe they can do buffs and it's based on how many minions you have, so the size of your army matters. They can summon soldier minions and maybe have them be more effective, so minions should attack. I think I have them right now, like a snake attempts to poison, but it doesn't do damage when it like bites them. But I'm thinking of having the minions do a small attack that like stacks up damage depending on how many you have, and that the general could increase their damage. The herbalist, I didn't put any ideas, I just added that recently. Hunters, like I said, they're like survivalists. Maybe they can cure poison or resist poison. I'm thinking of them summoning an animal companion, so like a wolf would make sense, but I'm thinking of one that is like the horse, one that maybe you can only have one of, and it's quite strong. And I could come up with like more than one idea for that. Also, they could have field skills for harvesting. They might be spread around, like the herbalist might have one, the lumberjack might have one, hunter. But again, I don't know what that means yet. It might be for components that an alchemist could use in their potions or a witch could use in some abilities. Not crafting, just consumables. An illusionist creates illusory doubles. I'm also thinking that if they're going to be the specialist, they should be able to make use of their illusory doubles more than other classes. So maybe they can gain additional benefit from having them or command them to do something. Knights, I've already drawn it with a shield. They're a guy in a suit of armor. They have a shield. They have a like a polearm axe type of thing. So like the defense buffs their armor, like that's a basic move to have, and they should have it. I also think of taking a stance and having maybe a larger defense buff, but lowering your agility to do it. The lumberjack has the cleave ability that kind of slices through all the enemies. That's kind of what I was thinking of what an axe could do. But also, like I said, harvesting. Magic Knight, I don't know why I didn't put anything there yet, but I mean, you could go wild with that. I'm thinking the martial artist. I mean, think Dragon Ball, think like Goku, an after image where I'm thinking more when they're missed than hit. They would create an illusory double that would increase their evasion further, but unlike the illusionist, they don't have any control over when they're created. And sort of like, what do they call that? Like inverse ninja, probably, like, you know, the ninja fighting off all the guys in a martial arts movie or whatever. Maybe the more minions they have, the more damage you do. Medic, just big heal spell. That's their main thing that they do. So obviously, like, healing status effects make sense here as well. A medium, the idea I had for how does interacting with ghosts make sense? Well, I'm thinking maybe when party member dies, that becomes a defense buff, like a protective spirit. So if anybody dies, the medium automatically gets a defense buff. The psychic, I basically have what they do up here, and I've talked about that, but I also had the idea of, well, if you're detecting where people are with your mind, maybe blindness, the status effect, doesn't do a whole lot. You can detect where they are psychically. That's another passive ability. Monks, calm minds that are immune to berserk, fear, charm, and sleep, or at least resistant to it. Also a mind buff, although mind buffs also resist these, although that could be passed to people using it as a scaling stat for magic. Necromancers summon skeletons. I might want to have a couple types of undead minions that they can summon. Ninjas, I have smoke bombs that attempt to blind every enemy. And also I'm thinking of a little bonus if they escape. Like, let's say they do blind an enemy, maybe they get time back. Maybe it costs them time to use a smoke bomb, but you get time. If you blind everybody, it's basically free. I also have the idea that they could switch in without incurring a penalty. So normally if you switch, they would be turned off. Like, switching is the action for the turn, but maybe a ninja just comes in and attacks as a surprise, which could be interesting. Maybe that would work for an assassin as well. Now, paladin, you know how they're usually depicted. Big armored knights that are also cleric adjacent. They have a lot of the cleric abilities. But I'm thinking if you're fusing to make them, they're going to inherit those abilities anyway. So if they get some healing, maybe some of it could be inherent, like minor healing abilities. But when I think of a holy religious warrior, I think they should be really focused on like punishment. Like paladins, I think often are like a little bit overzealous. And I like the idea of these based on sins, right? Like punish lust, huge damage to a charmed foe, punish sloth, huge damage to a sleeping foe, and wrath to a berserk foe. And I didn't find that any of the other ones fit. But I talked about the mutiny ability for the pirate that forces enemies' minions to attack them. Pyromancer. When I get the sorcerer, I want them to maybe have some fire abilities as well. But how does a pyromancer better? So I don't think I'm going to give a multi-target fireball spell to the sorcerer, but I might give a multi-target one to the pyromancer and also the single target fireball. But pyromancer, when they're present or have their passive ability, maybe they increase the damage that burning does, or the likelihood that it causes fear, which is a side effect of burning. Ranchers, I just have them summoning horses and sheep. That's all they do. Raiders, not super detailed, actually. I think maybe I came up with them as hunter and thief. And I was like, what does that make? A raider, I guess, which I guess is why I think of them as an archer. So like flaming arrows, maybe incorporate burning as a byproduct of one of their attacks, but not obviously as focused as the pyromancer. Rogues, I'm thinking they just get faster as they attack, maybe double attack, so maybe 2 triggers for certain things. Returning to the beginning of a dungeon floor or a dungeon is an ability that is pretty common in RPGs. For sailors, I had this idea that they could douse burning with water. Also had an idea that they could drink. So maybe it's an attack buff, but there's a chance that it poisons you or puts you to sleep, or you're an angry drunk and it makes you berserk. So maybe not a high chance, maybe not super risky, but maybe not a huge attack benefit either. So it'd be like an early game type of buff you could do. It's just kind of playful as an idea. And this is one idea. So samurais, I want them to be more defensive than a knight, but still a basic physical class. But some idea I had was that maybe they control the battle clock by expending all of the time they have remaining and then using damage based on that. So like, let's say you have 6 points of time left. Well, they use 7 and they give the enemy's battle clock very little time to start. So maybe only one of them has time to go. So you're kind of like controlling how much time they have and playing defensively that way. Or that defense is offense, that whichever attack or defense is higher, or maybe just one sets the other, but that maybe attack's floor is where your defense is at, so you can't have any less than that. Scholar, I had these ideas for them having more EXP gain, but I also thought, what if they were like a librarian type too, and they could just induce silence, like just shush them. Shepherds, I have these abilities coded in, that's why they're just names. So summon a sheep, and then follow was the one where they don't run away at the end of battle. So you can invest some time and do summoning minions outside of battle. Sorcerers, so I have a burning status effect. That really makes a lot of sense for fire spells. I'm thinking if I want to have other elemental abilities, I don't really want to have elemental weaknesses where you have to guess, but that elemental spells would thematically fit what you would imagine they do. So ice spells might inflict turns of sleep. So, I mean, which is really like not just sleep, but like a stun, and it just kind of represents both, but it slows them down. It could even just debuff their agility, but also a wind-based spell, a whirlwind that just blows away their minions without doing damage. So maybe the more effective way of getting rid of minions, but the downside that it doesn't do anything else. Thieves, just a basic steal ability that tries to grab an item from the enemy's loot pool. Avoiding triggering traps in the overworld. Maybe switching out with no penalty, just like the ninja and the assassin might switch in with no penalty. Thieves might be able to run away and like pass it off to the next guy. Also, there's not a lot of incentive in some JRPGs to like steal items when the items you get aren't that good, but I'm thinking that the act of stealing might inherently, for a thief, give them a buff. So maybe they successfully steal and then they immediately get an agility boost because they're trying to run away. The idea I have for Valkyrie is like themed off of Ragnarok. So this is a source of like a revival spell, but maybe with a downside. Or it depends. I mean, maybe if you have high attack physical party members, it might be good, where they revive the party members, but they're berserk when they come back. So, they're ready for Ragnarok or whatever, but that could be good for a bunch of barbarians. Vampires should have attacks that drain health, obviously. Maybe they should be able to inflict charm, and also a mist form that could deal with evasion. I need to rework a bit of evasion mechanics, actually, for a few that mention it. Vikings, I mean, really, they're a lot like warriors and knights and all this, just a physical class, but I thought they could sacrifice minions, because Viking sacrifice or whatever. For that cost, maybe it's a party-wide buff. So whereas a cleric might get a blessing from some deity that heals you over time or gives you more luck, maybe Vikings are getting a buff from a my games version of Odin or a warrior god that gives you an attack buff, a party-wide attack buff. Warriors, I'm thinking they're more smashing than stabbing, so big hits that scatter minions, possibly. Maybe break armor. I don't think I have anything in here that breaks armor yet. I thought I did, but warriors, brave, maybe the resistance to fear status effect, lowering your own defense to raise your offense by being reckless. Then for witches, I had the idea of, I think I got that from a magic card too, where they, when you cast a spell, it would make a token of some type of creature. And I thought maybe a witching hour could be, how did they get all their summons and gather them around them, is maybe when they cast a spell, their familiars come out of the woodwork. So they cast a spell, maybe a snake or a demon or a frog comes, and they can use that in their witch's brew. Also, transforming an enemy into a frog for some number of turns is a classic witch thing. I need to work out how that works, because it's not a status effect that I have yet, but making a brew, so just sacrificing all of your minions at once. And if there's snakes in it, maybe it's a poison brew. Skeletons might give you bone broth that heals your MP, and sheep might have meat that heals your HP. So I don't know, it's like a witch's cauldron or a stew. I don't know. Each minion could give a different effect, but you sacrifice them all at once, make a big potion, and then distribute it somehow. Also, just a negative effect, I want them to burn worse than other things because they're witches. Maybe that's a net downside, but then you pass off that to a fusion and you don't include that. Or actually, I did have here an idea for that. What did I have? Take double damage from burning, but when you're burning, have a chance to ignite a random enemy. So that actually could be downside and upside. That was a lot. I can't imagine that was of interest the whole way through for everybody, but if anybody actually watched the whole thing, I mean, thank you. There was a lot of information in there. I hope if anybody did watch the whole thing, then they're excited about the direction of the game. And I mean, it's 35 minutes probably. So I can't thank you enough if you actually watched this whole thing. But to anybody who watched any part of it, thank you so much. I'm going to get back to regular devlogs. The end of summer was a little hectic. I'm hashing out all these ideas without a lot of implementation right now, but it's a pretty big bundle of ideas where I can get back to more regular updates. So thank you very much, and I'll see you soon.